What is up, wrestling fans? Welcome to another episode of the Smark Smack Talk podcast. I'm your host, as always, Tony Mango, and joining me, as always, are Callum Wiggins
Enjoy this while it lasts.
and Robert D. Felice.
That's right. We're all going down.
I feel like everybody in the world is sending emails about, well, we are committed to the safety of our patrons, and we are going to have a lot of antibacterial soap and whatever registers. So, yeah, here's your coronavirus thing. The Smack Talk podcast will go on as continued. It's a podcast. There you go. What we're doing today is a Mount Rushmore, if you can't tell by the title and the graphics and all the other information that goes along with this. If you can't, then you got bigger problems than the coronavirus because you can't read. But what we're doing today is sponsored by Patreon. Patreon Guest 5 has picked this as part of the Pick Your Poison tier. And if you don't know what that means, Patreon is Patreon. You should know Patreon by now, but it's a way to sponsor the show. And with the Pick Your Poison tier, you can actually pick what the feature you want us to do. And that's why Guest 5 had mentioned doing this. So that's why we're doing it. And this is all that much more important because the Patreon is the only real way to make money off of this podcast, especially because I was supposed to be remonetized by now. I mentioned before over the past couple of weeks that this channel got demonetized in February from YouTube just being stupid and thinking that the Sexiest Superstars tournament, I'm assuming predominantly more than anything else, is just too sexually gratifying, despite the fact that it's a podcast and it's got no real graphic imagery and all that other kind of stuff. But hey, you label something hottest and they just go, oh my God, the keywords and whatever. And I was supposed to get this remonetized by now. And apparently YouTube is also stupid enough that they go, well, wait a month and then you can reapply. And then when you reapply, they say, well, we'll probably get back to you within a month or so. So we're looking at maybe 2 months minimum of not making any money off of this channel outside of Patreon. So if you are one of the listeners to this and you feel like we are worth at least $1 a month for all of our content, please consider donating because it does make a big difference, especially when it comes to the idea that this whole coronavirus thing might screw up a lot of other things as well. And it seems like, everybody's kind of feeling it. But think of the fact that even a channel like this, if there's no WrestleMania, there's a whole lot less going on and a whole lot less clicks and a lot of views and all that. So who knows how this all plays out. But at least as far as something like Patreon, somebody like Guest 5 donating to the Pick Your Poison tier helps out quite a bit. So even $1 from more and more and more people can help us keep the lights on. So consider donating if you want to keep the lights on for Smark Out Moment, and if you want us to continue to grow and continue to be able to do these things. You're going to be stuck in your house. You might want to have things to listen to. Just putting it out there. We will be doing a dark cast pretty soon. And when you get to the $10 or above tier, including the Pick Your Poison tier, which is above the $10 mark, then you get access to the Patreon exclusive episodes of the Smack Talk side of things. And very quickly, I want to talk about the fact that the Patreon is also a part of Fanboys Anonymous. And if you want more Fanboys Anonymous content, which is the Geek Culture website for movie reviews, if movies exist in this time frame anymore because they keep getting canceled and pushed back, and all the other kind of things that we can do there, then if you want more of that, donate to the Patreon of fanboysanonymous.com and follow the Facebook and Twitter and the YouTube channel and all the other kind of things like that. So Patreon stuff is out of the way. But before we get into the Mount Rushmore, I want to remind everybody, leave a comment below. Tell us your thoughts on all the things we're going to be talking about tonight or today or whatever you're listening to this. I don't know, this afternoon. But that applies to not just normal discussions, but also your Mount Rushmore list and all that. So if you are listening to this on the audio-only platforms like Spotify or Stitcher or whatever, and you can't leave a comment, hop on over to YouTube and drop a comment there because that's where they actually have comments. And while you're there, subscribe to the channel if you haven't done that already. Ring that little notification bell, like the video, and that's all greatly appreciated as well. So We're a couple minutes into this. Let's explain what a Mount Rushmore is, if you don't know by now. This is our 7th Mount Rushmore that we've done, which, imagine if that was true in the United States, if they were just like, let's build more Mount Rushmores. Just all mountain ranges, just let's carve faces on them. Especially when you come to multiple faces when it comes to this. Mount Rushmore is the monument in the United States where it's got 4 of the presidents, and it's been a thing over the years where people have just been like, who's on the Mount Rushmore of blah, blah, blah. It's, not necessarily that those are the 4 best presidents of all time or something, but that's where we take the concept. And we've done comedy acts, we've done the Mount Rushmore of wrestling, and so on and so forth. So this one is dedicated to tag teams. And Guest 5 had specifically mentioned not to keep it to just WWE. So this is not the Mount Rushmore of WWE tag teams. It's the Mount Rushmore of pro wrestling tag teams, which means we can be talking about Ring of Honor, we could be talking about Impact, New Japan, WCW, ECW, AWA, AAA, CMLL, anything that we can really kind of bring in there. Naturally, I'm going to focus more on WWE because I've always been more of a WWE guy, and I don't have a whole lot of information about the good old NWA days and all that other kind of stuff, but I'm sure that Callum and Rob are going to fill me in on a lot of different things here, and we might have a funky-looking list by the end of this. Who knows? Let's just dive into this with question number 1 that I've got for you guys. Do you have, not necessarily to reveal them, but do you have like a 4 tag team kind of thing that you have in mind of being like, okay, well, I've got a list of a couple people that have to be on the list, and it's pretty much these 4?
I have 2 that I think absolutely need to be on this list, and will argue. Well, I honestly, considering the 2 that they are, I shouldn't have to argue them, and I think it'll be interesting to see the other half that we end up meshing with these 2 that I have in mind.
I've tried to enter this one with as open a mind as I possibly can, so I can't say I definitively have the 4, but looking at the teams that I've gotten listed down and the ones that I've researched, 4 are kind of forming, but I'll obviously take on other discussions and stuff like that and see where it goes.
And we're all in agreement that Headbangers is on this list, right?
Absolutely. Team number 1, Mosh and Thrasher. Okay.
Team 2, Drew McIntyre and Cody Rhodes.
Absolutely.
There you go.
Team 3, John Cena, David Otunga.
And Team 4, Heath Slater and Justin Gabriel. All right, well,
yeah.
There you go.
There it is.
Check out the merch shops and TeePublic and Redbubble.
God, Santino and Kozlov just missed out.
So,
Just barely.
If it was the Mount Rushmore 5, then. So, actually, before we start talking about a bunch of these, obviously none of them are going to get on this list, but I think we need to clarify something. And I put this up on the Mega Maniacs, and we had a tiny little bit of a discussion about it, but I didn't think about it well enough in advance for us to really have a whole lot of discussion. Do staples count? Because I think we kind of need to make a distinction here. And when I was writing up a couple different things, I wrote down, for instance, this is something I'm going to put a pin in. We'll discuss this later. But for instance, the idea of the Outsiders, Scott Hall and Kevin Nash. And then there's the NWO, which is the 2 of them and Hulk Hogan and 106 other people or whatever. Or there's D-Generation X. You've got Shawn Michaels and Triple H. But you also have Chyna. And you have Rick Rude, and you have the New Age Outlaws, and you have X-Pac. And it's like, all right, well, the New Age Outlaws, that's a tag team, but that is a separate tag team before they got into DX, and there's a tag team inside of DX, but DX is a tag team. But so how do you guys justify this kind of thing? Is something like the New Day a tag team, or is it, since it's a trio, is it a stable and it doesn't count?
The New Day in particular are absolutely a tag team. 90% of their work has been in the tag team scene. In the case like DX, as you're thinking of it specifically, Tony, the tag team is the New Age Outlaws. You can argue that later on down the line there is the DX tag team of Hunter and Sean. But the main, the faction is not the tag team.
I kind of try and draw a distinction of the idea of A faction is kind of a conglomeration of people that fulfill different roles in different areas of the card. So, take like the Nation of Domination, for example.
What do we take? I think we lost Callum.
Oh, sorry.
Callum's computer's got the
It moves around a
coronavirus.
bit. Yeah, definitely. It's coughing up every now and again. But if you have someone like saying the Nation of Domination, The Rock's a single star in that group.
Right.
So you can't really class them all as like a tag team. But you could say maybe D'Lo Brown and Mark Henry representing Nation of Domination could be. But I can't say for certain with any of these. But I think it's something that we would have to go on a case by case basis.
Mm-hmm.
Like say, I wouldn't say certainly the NWO doesn't count. There's too many members of the NWO to form a specific tag team. The Outsiders would count because there's a definitive, okay, it's these two guys.
Yeah, and it's weird because even when you get into people that have won tag team titles, look at something like, well, they don't have a name yet, but like Seth Rollins and his Disciples. AOP is definitely a tag team. There's no arguments about that. They are former tag team champions. They've been a tag team for a couple of years now. Seth Rollins and Buddy Murphy, they get thrown into the mix there. And you would think just instinctively like, okay, well, Rollins and Murphy aren't a part of this tag team and it's a stable and whatever. Yet Rollins and Murphy are former tag team champions. And then you're like, all right, well, they're a tag team. So it's like Rollins and Murphy, I would consider a tag team. AOP, I would consider a tag team. But the group of the four, I wouldn't consider a tag team, which is very, very strange.
Well, an interesting one would be The Shield as a faction. Are they a faction or a tag team? Because I would personally consider them a tag team because most of the times they've been brought together, it's to be part of the tag team scene, even though one or more of them is typically a main eventer at any one time.
I think that I kind of look at the distinction as being like a faction or a stable or even a trio's worth of people or whatever, that I can constitute them a tag team if they interact as you could pick any of them and they can tag up in matches on a regular basis, as opposed to like, I can't imagine like NWO. I don't remember for sure, so it might have happened, but when it's like Hogan and Savage and Bischoff and Scott Hall and Kevin Nash and Horace Hogan and Scott Steiner and Buff Bagwell and all that, it was like you weren't seeing Hulk Hogan and Buff Bagwell in tag team matches going for the tag titles. So that's like, that's not a group to me. But like the Undisputed Era, for instance, they all were considered tag team champions at the same time. So you can technically argue that. But to me, if you say the Undisputed Era, what's the tag team? It's Bobby O'Reilly, Bobby Fish and Kyle O'Reilly. And Strong and Cole are not really a part of the tag team, even though they technically were. So that's kind of one of those things that I guess we're going to be bringing things up here and there, and we can kind of make some distinctions on the fly. But if anybody's wondering why like NWO is not on this list, it's probably because of that. And I think that we're kind of all sort of in agreement here. It's not like we're going to mention the Dudley Boyz. Well, it's Bubba Ray and Devon. It's not
Big Dick and Spike. And...
yeah, that kind of thing. So couldn't remember Big Dick Big Dick Dudley and Spike I remembered, but yeah.
You can always rely on Rob to remember that Big Dick.
Well, yeah, I guess so.
So I guess let's just start naming some names and start coming up with some things. I normally have a list of like a bunch of different things, and I usually go with a bunch of like, well, let's get some of the funny ones out of the way and all that. There's just far too many tag teams to go and start naming these ones that are never going to get a chance on this list. So I feel like we might as well not even mention a lot of those. But I did start writing down some random names, and I want to kind of toss a few out that I wouldn't vote for at all. but I do kind of feel like, I don't know, maybe worth a minute's worth of discussion or something like that. For instance, like, if you were sticking this to WWE and you were sticking it to a certain time frame, there was a time frame where the Smoking Guns, for instance, were like one of the biggest, best tag teams that they had. That's been completely blown out of the water, but like,
because they only had 3 at the time. Like,
yeah, but I mean, like, you know, you go back in time and the Smoking Guns becomes one of those like, oh, this is one of the Mount Rushmores of this tag team division or whatever. You know, time passes you by, and you know, no chance that Smoking Guns are going to be on this list. Same thing with like the Godwins, or I mentioned the Headbangers earlier or whatever like that. But I don't know, I'll toss out a couple of these names that I had seen on. I looked at a bunch of like top 50 lists and stuff, and here's just a few that I think are not in the discussion. The Rock and Sock Connection, to me, not a Mount Rushmore tag team.
no, not at all. Although
It's a pairing of two
obviously-
big stars.
But probably the pairing that not only popularized that style of team, but made it into more than just an angle. Like Rock and Sock Connection, for whatever reason, is just as iconic as some of the other Attitude Era tag teams.
Yeah, they're definitely not the Mount Rushmore thing, primarily due to longevity as much as anything. I mean, as over as that act was, it's less than a year, really, they were teaming together.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't say they're like the ones that popularized this idea of bringing two main events together. That's kind of been a trope of professional wrestling for basically since tag team wrestling was first instituted. Used to have tandems of like, didn't they have Bob Backlund and Pedro Morales win the tag team titles at one point when they were both WWF and Intercontinental champion?
Yeah, they've done that. So I guess it's more of just like that is what wrestling does. But I think Rock and Sock gave like a life and identity to just this mashup of two top stars.
On a similar note, the Mega Powers. I don't
Right.
think that the Mega Powers are a Mount Rushmore tag team, because my qualifications for tag teams, and I think that you guys are in agreement, just because they were a part of a big angle and just because they were a big thing for a little bit of time doesn't mean that they should be a Mount Rushmore tag team, because the tag teams should be the ones that are like the tag team divisions. So,
Well, I would add another distinction onto that. I think to at least be even considered for this list, you have to have had been a tag team champion as that team.
I feel like if you're a tag team that is in the discussion of Mount Rushmore stuff, if you didn't win the tag team title, something's up.
Yeah.
I can't think of a single person that wouldn't have won the tag team titles at some point, maybe. You know, like even like the Brothers of Destruction. To me, no, not a Mount Rushmore tag team, even though it's Kane and Undertaker, and that's a crazy tag team. Where I'd rule out, obviously, the Bushwhackers. I'd rule out the Natural Disasters. I'd rule out like a lot of these different types of things. But here's a name that I know that some people might potentially want to at least have in the discussion, but I'm going to vote no. The Rockers. To me, the Rockers is not a Mount Rushmore top 4 tag team of all time. I love Shawn Michaels. Everybody knows that. But they were just kind of WWE's version of another tag team that is a bigger deal in the pro wrestling business.
Yep.
And eventually, you know, even though they did win the tag team titles and it didn't work out the same way, because it's like, well, that doesn't really count and all that other kind of stuff. You know, I got to take out the Rockers. I don't think that they're even in the maybe pile. Which is kind of crazy because they are a big tag team in some ways.
They are, but I think we might as well get it out here. There's the 1980s time period, like the Hogan era, had a wonderful bounty of tag teams. Like you have, you know, the Hart Foundation, which is absolutely a team that warrants a lot of discussion because, you know, they were so popular at the time. The British Bulldogs, the Islanders, the Killer Bees. I mean, you can stop me if you want to talk about any of these, but just like that era had so many teams. Tag teams were an integral part of the business at that time.
Yeah, I'm not voting Strike Force. I'm not voting the Heenan
Why are you throwing out the
family.
weirdest names, like for the ones that you're not voting for? I'm surprised you haven't said Men on a Mission yet. For that
Well,
matter.
I mean, that's because they're going to be in the list. No, I guess since I mentioned the Rockers, and there's this idea that this is our version of this team, and this is our version of this team. Let's call out one of the big ones. Who would you say is kind of like the number one indicative example of that? It's the Rock and Roll Express.
Yeah, and they're on the list as far as I'm concerned. I wasn't going to bring them up so soon because they're one of the two that I absolutely think need to go on the Mount Rushmore.
As much as I don't have this passion for the old time wrestling and all that stuff, and I can't say this great match against this thing, it's like the Rock and Roll Express created a bunch of tag teams. Like we wouldn't have the Young Bucks without the Rock and Roll Express. We wouldn't have the Rockers. We wouldn't have, and you can probably name 30 tag teams that come about from the Rock and Roll Express. Callum probably has a list of 20 of them.
List of 20?
Of
you're selling me short a little bit.
Yeah, like
teams that come out of the Rock and Roll Express.
Oh, maybe not necessarily out of the Rock and Roll Express, but
just in that style.
Yeah, I mean, they are the archetype of the high action, high flying ultimate babyface tag team. It's quite funny because going back and reading through some of the history of tag teams and along those lines, a lot of the big definitive tag teams are heels, especially in the early days. And now this was a team that were just born and bred to be the top baby faces in the division. And they were there. They had like a gutsy fighting spirit, which appealed to the guys, and they were good looking, and they had long hair, and they had the rock and roll aesthetic, which appealed to the ladies. They were, I mean, they're still going.
They're still
wrestling.
Fucking going, and they're great.
They were NWA Tag Team Champions a couple of months ago,
and they're on AEW. I mean, like they are the tag team in a lot of ways, and they're really, really good. Like. Even tag teams like the Rockers, you could argue maybe individually Shawn Michaels blows Ricky Morton out of the water, but as a tag team, I'd much rather watch the Rock and Roll Express.
I mean, guess how many tag team championships they've won as a team?
At least 35.
When I checked Wikipedia, so obviously checked my sources there, but I counted 43 separate reigns as a type of tag team champion, including 10-time Smoky Mountain Wrestling tag team champions, because they were like Jim Cornette's go-to tag team during that the run of that promotion.
They were born in Memphis, and they're actually, as funny as it is, because they're far more legendary on a global scale now, but they're actually supposed to be the B team for the Fabulous Ones. And that was like another, not as high octane, but still, young, good looking babyface tag team. And then they go to Oklahoma, they go to Mid-South, and they get paired up against what will become the Midnight Express with Cornette. And it's off to the races.
They've helped popularise the scaffold matches that they had against those teams.
They do eventually fight the Rockers, but it's like in AWA. They have runs in, as Colin said, Smoky Mountain, WWF, even in the late 90s as part of that failed NWA thing. But I mean, they are tag team wrestling, and like, if you want to just throw out some matches, obviously anything they've ever done with the Midnight Express, the Russians, the Koloffs, the Heavenly Bodies in Smoky Mountain. These guys are tag team wrestling, period.
And I think a big definitive that they were main event tag team wrestlers as well. Not so much like, obviously they were a tag team that was main eventing, is what I mean by that. They weren't a pair of main eventers individually, but they were a tag team main event act. They would regularly outdraw the quote unquote big single stars during their tours with Jim Crockett Promotions. And to the point where a lot of wrestlers, I think there was one point where Dusty Rhodes gave a quote of, after a show that they had, so like Dusty Rhodes' group of like big single stars didn't manage to sell out the arena they were in, whereas the Rock and Roll Express sold out as the top act on their card. He basically went up to them and said, "Yeah, you're not selling out my arena again," and tried to break them up as a tag team.
And
so it's like,
did to the point where like there was dissension between them because he's like, you know what, you're gonna lose a hair match and the Russians are gonna cut your hair, and Ricky Morton was like, no. And they ended up on the outs with the NWA because of that. They're so good that they worked with the Horsemen, and Ric Flair was like, fuck it, put the belt on Ricky Morton so I can keep working with them and we can keep making money. That's how much money these guys generate. And they're on the Mount Rushmore, right? Like,
I think they're heavy front runners right now.
I don't know, men on a mission. To me,
I mean,
I kind of can't see a scenario where they're not on it. And there's going to be a lot of mistranslations when it comes to me not knowing the full scope of a lot of different tag teams from back in the day and all that, just because I'm not a historian and I never cared enough to really look into that stuff. And, you know, I've never once even felt like the slightest inclination to click on those sections on the WWE network to watch those old matches, because I find them boring as all hell. I don't even want to watch a Rock and Roll Express match from back in the day. And that might seem like heresy, but it's just old-timey wrestling doesn't appeal to me. But I can still appreciate the fact that it's like, okay, well, you know, when it comes to movies, for instance, and anybody who's the type of person with classics that they act like, I've heard this phrase before, oh, there hasn't been a good movie made since 1974. Ah, fuck you. But at the same time, it's like, yeah, a lot of movies wouldn't have been made without these different types of movies that came out there. And, you know, I'm going to argue The Godfather is still one of the top 2 or 3 best movies of all time and all that other kind of stuff. So it's like, yeah, the Rock and Roll Express, to me, as much as the Young Bucks are one of the best tag teams that's going on right now, I'd bump the Young Bucks off the list because the Rock and Roll Express is overall more important than that. And I feel like they kind of have to get in there. It'll be weird if we get to the point where we have a couple names and we have to start, you know, whittling down a list of 7 to 4 or something, but I'm bumping them up to like the guaranteed spot sort of thing.
I wouldn't go as far as to say we're already gonna discount the Bucks or anybody that we haven't discussed yet, but they definitely gotta be on this list in some way, because just that archetype, like the, you know, babyface high flyer tag team, one's a blonde and gets, you know, the reaction from the women, and then the other one, you know, can get the hot tag in. Like, so many teams have ripped that off. Even like the Hardys, you know, rip off the Rock and Roll Express to a degree.
Yeah, they're like a different version of them, but they're same kind of mold.
And they are just that good. And Tony, I would argue, I could show you a Rock and Roll Express match that you'll enjoy.
Oh, I'm sure that there are out there, but
it will hold out. And I think that that's important for the Mount Rushmore. In order for you to be on the Mount Rushmore, your matches or promos have to be so good that you can watch them now and it holds up to anything going today. And the Rock and Roll Express have that.
I would heavily disagree with that statement. I feel like you need to take them in the context they were put in, because certain tag teams don't have the wrestling that would be very popular or very easy to digest for a lot of fans today, because they just don't have the athleticism, they don't have the, like, that sort of aspect of the character of the wrestlers that perform nowadays. But it doesn't mean that they're any less of a tag team, because what they did worked arguably a hell of a lot better back then than it does for tag teams now. Because I think we're in a stage of we can all appreciate how good tag team wrestling is when it's done really well, but there's still a sideshow act.
I mean, you give me Revival, American Alpha, DIY, AOP, like these types of tag teams, and you ask me if I'd rather watch that or if I'd rather watch, I don't know, the Fabulous Freebirds against someone or whatever like that, I'm gonna be like, just give me the NXT people. Like, there's no comparison. But it's all like you gotta weigh history versus that stuff, and yeah, I mean, people might go crazy over George Hackenschmidt. I ain't gonna watch any of his matches, and Bruno Sammartino is nowhere near as interesting to watch as AJ Styles is, but Bruno means more to the wrestling business than AJ Styles did, you know. It's kind of you gotta balance it out and stuff. So part of my bias is always going to be based off of like I only really watch WWE stuff, and in that stuff I'm going to be leaning towards the ones that I like the most and stuff. But you know, I gotta try to curb that a little bit. That's why I won't make the case that like the New Day is guaranteed to be on this list like that. But it's like the New Day to me, I feel is a modern day Mount Rushmore tag team. Like I feel like the New Day is on this level that a lot of tag teams haven't been able to reach. And if we were sticking to, I don't know, of the past 20 years, New Day would be on my Mount Rushmore for sure.
Absolutely.
But
yeah, I feel
you know, not of all time.
No, well, I mean, there's still. I don't want to say rule them out completely. It's very unlikely that they break into the all-time one, but they've been a very well-sustained tag team. They've been wrestling for a long time as a unit. They've achieved a lot of success in the biggest company in the world. Yeah, sell tons of merchandise. They're big stars. I don't want to I don't want to add Kofi Kingston's world title reign in the discussion of it. It's an indication of how big like the tag team is. They managed to get Kofi up to that level eventually, but we shouldn't be talking about what individuals achieved. So if we talk about Edge and Christian, we can't talk about the fact that Edge won 10 world championships, because that doesn't count.
I think it's as cheeky and as much as I don't like the phrase, it's an honor just to be nominated. In a case like this, the fact that a team like the New Day can't fully be ruled out, in spite of the fact that they just exist in the modern time, says how good they are as a team.
Well, I feel like we shouldn't. It's very unlikely we're going to have like tons of new tag teams in, but there is a strong argument to make that NXT, as we've discussed, with like American Alpha, Revival, Undisputed Era, DIY, AOP, Sanity, like some of these great tag team matches they've had in the past, they are one of probably the greatest tag team promotions of all time.
Absolutely.
In terms of just pure match quality, there's probably few promotions that have matched the level of consistency of like brilliant tag team matches that NXT has produced over the last like 4 or 5 years.
What do you guys think about doing this? We're half an hour in and we have one name. How about maybe splitting the difference a little bit and doing on our list here? We'll figure out a Mount Rushmore of all time. But if we also kind of push some names off on the side and say Mount Rushmore of the modern era, and we do a second one in the middle of this.
That's totally fair.
I mean, we have to define what the modern era is.
Yeah, that would be the next step. I kind of think maybe if we do 2, we could either do 2 or we could do 3. We could either do like of all time going back to, you know, technically, I guess, like to like the Carney days type things, but more of like the golden era throughout history. And then we can do one that's more so of like, I guess the 90s onward.
Sure.
Yeah, we could consider that.
But if we wanted to, we could really even potentially split it to be like 3. Do like the golden era, and then like the 90s 80s attitude era, like I mean kind of like that sort of merge around type of thing. Probably not 80s, like 90s attitude era and ruthless aggression type stuff, and then maybe like modern or something like that if we wanted to do 3. I guess it kind of depends on how many we have in the discussion, because like the New Day to me, if we're doing a modern type thing, is a potential on the list, but then if we start going into like attitude era, then we have more tag teams in than that.
Well, I mean, if we were to end up splitting it 3 ways, I would say that you're probably looking more at like somewhere from like the 50s to the 70s, and then you're looking at the 80s. Then you can pretty much count out most of the 90s in general, and then you're back to like the modern era nowadays. Because there are some decent tag teams, but like I feel like going from the like class in a period of time between like the 90s, the Attitude Era, and the Attitude Era and like the Ruthless Aggression period, and saying that's like a section, and then saying the 80s and back are its own section. The 80s and back have probably 5 times the amount of great tag teams that period has. Just speaking historically, at the very least.
I guess we'll have you know what we'll do. We'll toss out these names like the New Day. I'll put them on the list of like hey, maybe we'll find a spot for them, and then we'll see how many we have. How about we do that?
We'll come to that close to the end. But there's plenty of tag teams we still got. Like we've only just scratched the surface.
Right?
The tag teams that we got.
We didn't even dive into. I mentioned them casually, but we didn't even dive into guys like the Hearts and the Bulldogs.
Right. How do you guys feel about Demolition? To me, that's a no.
They're an interesting one, because for the longest period of time until you had the New Day
until
take the record, like, a few years ago, they were the longest reigning tag teams in the biggest wrestling promotion in history.
And yet, I still feel like all they are is we couldn't get the Road Warriors.
You said it.
There is an argument to that, but
should we just say that too? The Road Warriors, Legion of Doom, whatever you want to call them, like they are on the list.
They are a massive, they're massive front runners again for this. It's interesting because I know how you talk about, and I'm not as a huge fan of like watching the old time, like old school wrestling thing, but I can watch it and appreciate a lot of it. I pretty much probably couldn't watch any Road Warrior matches because neither of them could wrestle.
Mm-hmm.
No, they sucked.
They absolutely sucked. But they got over because they didn't sell for anybody. And promoters told them explicitly, you do not sell for anybody. And funny enough, that got them over. Funny how that works. So you just put two big jack-looking guys in the ring and say, okay, you don't sell anybody else's moves, and that gets you over. Worked for them, worked for Goldberg. For a while, kind of until Undertaker got really good at working, it worked for him. Worked for Hogan.
Works for the most part for Brock.
Yeah. I mean, Brock can wrestle, but there's
but I mean, like they book him that way.
He's more over. Yeah, he's more over than ever now because he doesn't actually have big matches. He just beats the crap out of people. And yet, like people I know we do because we appreciate how like intricate matches put together and huge classics, and you have like the Ric Flairs and people of that ilk. But there has to be said that maybe the business nowadays could use more people that just,
believe in their
bulldoze
shit.
People. Yeah, just bulldoze people. Yeah, just bulldoze people and get over that one.
I agree. I mean, Road Warrior pop. We've heard that phrase a bunch of different times and stuff. Booker's even mentioned it like 6 times on WWE Backstage over the past couple of weeks. But like, as great as that tag team is, as far as the history of what they contributed to the business and stuff, it is hard to watch those matches because it is just sort of like, okay, they run the ropes and they clothesline you with this stiff clothesline, and it's basically these two burly dudes bump into each other, and it's like, oh my god, this is boring.
Now I'm gonna throw the caveat here, much like an Undertaker down the line and a Batista and even a Lesnar. As soon as they get in there with a team that could work, it's a lot more fun. Watching the Road Warriors versus the Skyscrapers or Demolition, not so much. Watch the Road Warriors versus Arn and Tully or Bret and Neidhart, and then you're having fun.
it's also interesting, the idea that by the time that Road Warriors actually ended up in WWE and became the Legion of Doom, it's by that point they were pretty much done as a main card drawing act. It's funny enough that as soon as they got into the biggest promotion in the world, they were pretty much like everyone was sick of their shtick, really.
And I would argue that their time in WWE hurt it to a degree because they didn't have, good teams to work off of and strong teams to make feuds with, because they had guys like the Nasty Boys and the Natural Disasters and the Beverly Brothers, and the desire to see the matches really weren't there outside of the Demolition match.
Yeah, it's just like if it's a weird situation where, like, obviously we're not doing the WWE Mount Rushmore tag teams, but if it was a WWE Mount Rushmore tag teams, the Road Warriors wouldn't be on it. But
Right.
then you talk about wrestling in general, Road Warriors are. It's like that really weird distinction of like you extend wrestling in further and they rise up, whereas if you limit it, they go down.
It's funny, if we were just doing WWE, I would almost demand that Demolition be on the list.
Yeah,
they're so much more integral to the WWE than the Road Warriors were. Even though once they got the Road Warriors, they cast Demolition to the side. Demolition was so much better overall to the foundation of WWE in the period of their growth.
I like as part of the research, I like just going back into the history of the Road Warriors, because the Legion of Doom name wasn't like a WWE invention.
Nope.
It was when they were part of a stable with Jake the Snake Roberts and a character called the Spoiler.
And King Kong Bundy.
Yeah, just like and it like just.
How'd they get their name, Tony?
Hmm?
Do you know how they got their name?
What, Legion of Doom?
Yeah.
Were they inspired by the DC group?
Literally, they're watching the Super Friends cartoon. Meanwhile, back at the Legion of Doom. There we go. You got it.
I'm surprised they got away with it, because, I mean, like, you got the Incredible Hulk and Hulk Hogan and, like, some rights issues from that back in the day. I would have thought that they wouldn't have been like, let's just not call it the same thing as that, because, And
then we go back to like the end of their WWF run, which is when Hawk pretty much gets suspended. Animal sticks around for a while until he suffers a back injury, which kept him out of. It's funny, we know so much about Shawn Michaels' back injury taking 4 years. People don't seem to remember that Hawk lost 4 years of his career to a back injury as well. Not Hawk, Animal lost 4 years of his career to a back injury as well. And during this time, Hawk started wrestling in New Japan with Kensuke Sasaki and formed the Hellraisers, which was essentially like the Japanese version of the Road Warriors.
And that's funny because it's like Legion of Doom, that's the DC villains. Road Warrior, okay, well that's, there's movie inspirations when it comes to Mad Max. And you got the Hellraisers, which is like, all right, well there's a horror franchise called Hellraiser.
Yeah,
it's like there's just like, let's go through this list of movies and TV shows and let's just pick our next tag team name. I know we're gonna be our new tag team's gonna be the Goodfellas or the Shawshank Redemption, or like, you know what I mean? This is funny.
Yeah, so I think there's a strong argument of the Road Warriors being on the Mount Rushmore.
I think,
despite how shitty they all were in the ring.
But just like we're talking about the Rock and Roll Express becoming an archetype, no team had more clones for a period of time than the LOD. Like, just, all right, we're going to get two big guys, we're going to paint them up, and there we go. I mean, Demolition, Powers of Pain, the Blade Runners, Sting and the Ultimate Warrior.
Another movie.
Yeah, like, it's crazy how much... Once an idea catches on, then it's like, oh, everybody's got to do it.
What would be like a modern movie that somebody would try to do based off of that? Because you couldn't really, like, that's the Fast and the Furious. They don't have like the whole gimmicky type thing. Then it would just be We're a Family.
Names wise, it's Kingsman.
And they would just wear like the suits and all that.
Yeah.
I don't know if there's like it, because I mean movies have changed and it's not like there's that type of like grungy, gritty, actiony type of thing like that going on quite as much anymore. Now everything's kind of
things are too
streamlined.
nuanced.
It'd have to be, I guess, like a parody of some kind of like Marvel type thing, since that's the biggest franchise.
The Avengers.
So, like, it'd probably be like the Avengers, yeah. They'd probably do
the Revengers or some stupid shit, like
the Avenged or some crap like that. Like, yeah. Even the Ascension is like a knockoff of the Road Warriors.
Because, hey, they're two big guys.
Put some red and black face paint on them. Give them some kind of shoulder pads. There you go. They'll get over if we keep burying them with everybody. So I currently have down Rock and Roll Express and Road Warriors as like our all-time-ish type of discussion things. And we got a couple potential things as far as like some other eras that we might go down with. I feel like we can lump these together as far as if we end up creating some extra error type stuff, at some point we're going to have to go down this rabbit hole. So let's just say it. Hardy Boyz, Dudley Boyz, Edge and Christian.
Integral to the Attitude Era. I don't know if any of them can get on the... Well, maybe the Dudleys can get on the Mount Rushmore.
Yeah, I was going to make that distinction as well. I think the only they're all really great tag teams, and they're very integral to like the hottest part of like the hottest period in wrestling. But only one of them really only fits my categorization of like a real tag team, which is the Dudley Boyz, in the fact that yes, Bully Ray eventually became his own thing and did stuff in TNA for a while and Ring of Honor, but they're the only ones that I feel like are just definitive tag teams. They're just like you can't imagine one without the other.
Hardy Boyz, I'd argue.
No, because like Jeff arguably is one of the biggest stars of his era as a singles.
But I feel like the Hardy... I feel like they, no matter what, they keep having those ties together. Like, even like I mean, I know that they haven't like, fully split and all that stuff at this point, but like, you have Matt Hardy leave WWE and it's like, let's get Jeff Hardy on WWE backstage and he'll talk about how the Hardy Boyz are going to split up again, but they're going to get back together again in the future and all that. And like, they'll be inducted together in the Hall of Fame.
I mean, they have as I said, they have the advantage over the other two in the fact that they are actually related to each other.
Yeah.
So of course they're going to be tied together.
BOYZ that's actually like that, Dudley Boyz, certainly not related. Edge and Christian, as much as they pretended like they were for a little bit, not related. But I think that it's kind of the Dudley Boyz out of those three makes the most sense if we were to put one of those three in the all-time-ish type of framing. It would be the Dudley Boyz. But I would say Hardy Boyz are number 2, Edge and Christian are number 3. And then if we got into separate era type things, all three would have to be a part of something. Like, it would be weird.
It's funny.
Not
I think if we talk about like on the Mount Rushmore of just tag team wrestlers, I think the only one that I'd put on that list overall would be Edge.
Edge does have like many tag team title reigns,
and for many periods of his career was just devoted to a tag team of some kind and always managed to shine.
I mean, he's won belts with Christian, Rey Mysterio, Hulk Hogan, Randy Orton,
Chris Jericho. Yeah, so I mean, it's interesting that you go back in those titles. It just shows what the Attitude Era was for tag team wrestling. So Edge and Christian are 7-time world tag team champions. Yet they have a combined time with the titles of 206 days. For context, that puts them behind the Smoking Guns, Lance Cade and Trevor Murdoch, and the Spirit Squad in terms of days holding the tag team titles.
I don't think there's a single tag team during that mid-2000s range that could even be worth bringing up. Like, I looked at this, like, these top 50 lists and stuff, and people are having, like, Brian Kendrick and Paul London, and I'm like, they should not be on a list of best tag teams of all time.
I think they're a fun tag team, but
if we're just talking like the overall history and discussion of how tag team wrestling has evolved, you've got to bring them up and bring up names like the world's greatest tag team. Kid and Murdoch, not so much. They did have a decent feud with the Hardys, though. But I can't believe that statistic of Edge and Christian are behind in combined days than the fucking Spirit Squad.
Well, it's even more funny with this. The Hardys have even less combined days as World Tag Team. They have 151 combined days as World Tag Team Champions. I add that distinction. It doesn't count the Raw and SmackDown reigns that they've had, but during that 6-time run that they had in the Attitude Era, they only held the titles for a combined 150 days or so. It's like
that's crazy.
Yeah, it's just they really the standard bearer team of that period was the Dudley Boyz. They were the ones that held the titles the most. They were the ones that were kind of the anchors of the entire division, because occasionally you had Edge and Christian going off and doing their own thing. You had the Hardys like fighting between each other every now and again. The Dudleys stayed basically solid until they decided stupidly to split them up during that brand extension and then hurriedly bring them back together.
I still feel like it's worth with that brand extension thing. At the time, I can understand why they were like, let's just try it. But it ultimately wasn't going to work out. How many days did they have those titles in comparison to the other two?
I would have agreed to that if they had plans for both of them. Beyond, let's make Devon a preacher.
And beyond, it's the thing that we complain about nowadays, which is like, oh, we're going to do it to shock them, and then they had nothing to do.
But Dudley Boyz, they also have to add the fact they're 25-time tag team champions. So they won it 9 times in WWE. Like they're former WCW champions, even though that happened in WWE as well. They're 8-time ECW champions. They won the IWGP Tag Team Champions, the NWA Tag Team Championships, the TNA Tag Team Championships. Their thing is just so wide ranging, and they're so decorated as a tag team.
Didn't win those NXT titles.
No, and they never won that 10th reign either, even though that seems to be the only reason they brought them back in the first place.
Yeah, that got them all messed up.
Yeah.
Midnight Express.
Great tag team.
Fantastic.
But it's funny because the interesting thing about the Midnight Express is that there isn't really... I mean, when you talk about the Midnight Express, the team that you kind of talk about is Bobby Eaton and Dennis Condrey. But
yeah,
they lasted for a lot longer than that over some different incarnations of people. I think there's probably about, when I checked it on Wikipedia, I think there was over a dozen different people that have been in the Midnight Express,
right,
at different times.
But I think when you're talking the tag team Midnight Express, you're talking when they get paired with Cornette, you're talking Eaton and Condrey, and then when Condrey splits, you're talking Eaton, Cornette, and Stan Lane.
Yeah. I think that sort of period, but that's like a 4 or 5 year period of 83 until about like 88, 89, around about that run. But still, like that, they were the total antithesis to the Rock and Roll Express. But that was a period of time where tag team wrestling was legitimately the main event, the big draw that was bringing people into the houses all the time.
And they are so much fun. I have a playlist on YouTube of the best Midnight Express matches just because I enjoy that stuff. I know that it doesn't hold up for some, but like the Midnight Express, I'm staring at the book right now, the 25th anniversary scrapbook, because I'm that big of a Midnight Express fan. I think if this was any other conversation of just great tag teams, they could have an argument for the Mount Rushmore, but with it being all time, I don't know if they make the cut.
Quick shout out to Bodacious Bart and Bombastic Bob.
Listen,
being
Tony.
a part of that group.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm gonna vote against Midnight Express. I kind of feel like
I wouldn't put them in the top 4.
No, I feel like anybody that would have this discussion would end up eventually going, yeah, well, the Rock and Roll Express means more, bump them out and that kind of thing too.
Can I go somewhere closer to home with the British Bulldogs? So British Bulldogs have to be, well, I mean, they're topical right now with Davey Boy Smith. just recently being inducted into, will be inducted into the Hall of Fame. Don't know when, because they won't have WrestleMania
Right.
to do it. But they're a funny team because I don't necessarily. I'm mainly bringing them up because I just want to talk about them a little bit more than thinking that they're definitively going to be in the top 4, because they are real innovators in terms of tag team wrestling. Like, they're some of the team that really brought in the real combination wrestling, a lot of high flying elements, a lot more exciting, free flowing style that you wouldn't necessarily see from tag teams of that period. And that was mainly due to the fact they were both like small guys. Like, I think Dynamite was like 5'8", so he had to make up for a lot of that by just being, well, essentially killing himself in the ring every single night, which he pretty much did. But I think the interesting thing about it is that they don't really have that much in terms of decoration, because they only won 2 Stampede Wrestling tag titles, and they won the WWF World Tag titles once. And that's basically it for their entire 7-year run as a tag team. Which I feel feels quite odd, considering how big they were in Japan, how big they were in a few other promotions as well, that they never really were given the straps to run with for a long period of time. I mean, their WWF run was meant to be a lot longer than it was supposed to be, but it got cut short because Dynamite hurt his back, and they had to surrender the titles. So I feel like they're a team that had more potential that could have potentially led to them being on the Mount Rushmore list, but because of how short their run ended up being and how lackluster their final act as a tag team was, it seems like they would be further out. I'd almost say that as an actual tag team, I'd almost put Owen Hart and British Bulldog ahead of these 2.
Yeah, I'll admit, British Bulldogs is a total blind spot for me. I don't know the extent of their careers when it comes to like how their influence has been. I can't name a single match of theirs. I don't know if I've watched an entire Dynamite Kid match, period. So I'm up in the air when it comes to that kind of stuff.
Well, I mean, we know how it ends in just total tragedy for the both of them. Like, their careers are 2 of the most like tragic careers in wrestling history, almost. Like Davey Boy Smith, like dying way too young of like drug overdoses and like serious drug addictions, and Dynamite Kid being confined to a wheelchair for most of his life and just being pretty much a very horrible human being in the first place. So almost by that, but I don't think that we should leave that against them in terms of their pure tag team ability.
How do you guys feel about the Hart Foundation?
One of the ones where if this was a Mount Rushmore of WWE teams, they'd have to be on it. But since it's not, I don't know if they make the cut.
I don't know if they'd even make the cut for me if it was just WWE. Just because, well, it's so... They were a great tag team, and they had some really good matches. They had some great feuds with British Bulldogs and Demolition and like Fabulous Rougeaus and people of that ilk. But one of them was so much more of a bigger star than the other one. I mean, their run as a tag team pales in comparisons to Bret Hart's run as a main eventer.
Yeah, but does that hurt the tag team thing?
I think it does, because
in a way,
I feel like, especially if you're going like a Mount Rushmore type aspect, really their pinnacle should be as a tag team.
Well, I don't think that like the overall careers of the individual people needs to be, well, if you succeeded beyond the tag team, that it hurts your tag team stuff. Like, to me, like Kofi Kingston winning the championship doesn't hurt the New Day at all. It only helps them.
Oh no, I'm not saying that doing something outside of the tag team like should be something that you're held against you. But I just feel like because it seems like the tag team aspect is such a small, I don't say insignificant, but such a small part of just Bret Hart's overall legacy, where it's kind of like it's the thing that Jim Neidhart is best known for, is that run as a tag team. But Bret Hart moved on to so much bigger and better things that it didn't render the tag team completely like pointless, because it certainly wasn't pointless. It helped get Bret over, but it meant that it was a launching pad for him rather than this is one of the biggest parts of my entire career, or at least that's what it feels like to me.
Yeah, but I don't think that hurts it, because it's like if his career would have ended before he won the championship, I think the Hart Foundation would just be the Hart Foundation, and just because he succeeded beyond that doesn't mean that makes that worse in comparison. Just because it doesn't look as good in comparison, because it's like, Hulk Hogan being as big as he was doesn't hurt the NWO, or like, I don't know, like, you know what I mean? Like Booker T is a part of Harlem Heat, and Booker T succeeded well beyond Stevie Ray. But Harlem Heat is a tag team we haven't talked about yet. That's a hell of a tag team. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I look at it like this. The Hart Foundation, I like them, and I think that they are a fun tag team. But one of the things that maybe Callum hasn't touched upon as to why he said they wouldn't even be on his WWE list is because their run was pretty short and largely uneventful, because back in those days, you only had so many pay-per-views. They had the run with Jimmy Hart, where they were heels, and that's how they first won the belts from the Bulldogs. And then once they break off from Jimmy Hart, they kind of go into just like a random series of, well, these will be a well-wrestled contest, but they're not put back into a major picture until August of 90, when they win the belts again, and then they're disbanded by, May of 91. So they're a good team, but they don't have a lot of memories.
Here's a team that I think we're pretty much all going to say no to, but it's just worth bringing up. APA of an era, a Mount Rushmore-ish team, but not a Mount Rushmore team in my mind.
Nah. I wouldn't say so.
Like I don't want to disrespect either individual, but the APA was like the Road Warriors with less face paint and less charisma.
All right. Well, since we're talking about this Attitude Era thing, let's talk about a team that Tony, I'm pretty sure, wants to put on the Mount Rushmore, but I'm categorically saying won't be on the Mount Rushmore. Is the New Age Outlaws?
I think they're at least in the discussion.
No, I don't think they're even touching the discussion.
Okay. In the year 1998, there was nobody more. There were people more over, but like their shtick is incredible and legendary. But like, as a team, what did they accomplish outside of being part of DX?
I feel like the New Age Outlaws is not only one of those teams that proves that synergy matters, just because it's like you could pair up a bunch of different people and it might not work, but like you got Rockabilly and the Roadie together, and they ended up forming a unit that ended up being something that I think stands the test of time. And yeah, to compare them to like the Rock and Roll Express seems kind of weird, but I feel like they were the Rock and Roll Express of a different era. And there's a lot of people that like DX is the reason why they got into pro wrestling. And the New Age Outlaws was a big part of that. And yeah, I kind of feel like that's a team that's worth talking about.
It's a rough reach to be like, yeah, the New Age Outlaws are on the Mount Rushmore of tag teams, because at the end of the day, they're an entrance. And I'm not being,
that's very definitive. Yeah,
that's so shitty to say, and like I love them.
Isn't the end of the day the Road Warriors are just face paint and shoulder pads?
Well, I would go with the argument that the Road Warriors sold out tons and tons of buildings, whereas the New Age Outlaws were part of the group that led behind Stone Cold Steve Austin in terms of getting all of these people in. It's hard to tell, because I'm not saying the New Age Outlaws weren't draws, because I'm pretty sure they were, because they did get like massive reactions when they came out, but everybody was painting in comparison to a draw to Stone Cold Steve Austin at that point.
Can you name 3 big time New Age Outlaws matches?
I can't name 3 big-time Road Warrior matches. I can't name 3 big-time Rock and Roll Express matches. But I think that you also, if you judge based off of the territory days, it's a different thing entirely than the WWE in the middle of the Monday Night Wars. Because you can't say like, oh, the New Age Outlaws, who did they ever draw? And it's like, well, they weren't in a territory where they needed to draw out that type of crowd. They were in the middle of the Monday Night Wars. And yeah, Austin was the big draw, but just because Austin was the big draw doesn't mean that they wouldn't. If you took the New Age Outlaws with their popularity and you put them in a territory and you put it in that era, I think that they draw super extremely well. If it's like, all things considered, like, the whole like inflation and all that other kind of things, like obviously their shtick wouldn't work years and years and years before that because people wouldn't be allowed to say those kind of things and like that kind of thing. But I feel like the New Age Outlaws is kind of a different era's Fabulous Freebirds or something like that. Like, you know how we kind of do comparisons where it's like, this person is like the modern day equivalent of that person. And if you sort of time displace them, they could fill in the same role. I feel like the New Age Outlaws are kind of in that kind of way.
Here's the one big distinction between the New Age Outlaws and all these other teams. Their run was a year and a half. 2 years, maybe. As a seriously over tag team. Whereas most of the other teams you're comparing it to, their runs lasted at least 5, maybe even close to decades. Like talk about the Rock and Roll Express, they're still going after nearly 40 years.
I mean, yeah. If you compare the two, like obviously, if we had like the Mount Rushmore of two tag teams, Rock and Roll Express and Road Warriors mean more to the business than New Age Outlaws. Like, I'm not going to make that argument, but like,
and we also have to.
I kind of feel like if you toss them aside as being like, nah, they can't even be in the discussion. It's like, oh, hold on a second,
Well, but here's the thing for me, like Road Warriors, Rock and Roll Express, Dudley Boyz, Hardy Boyz, even some of the ones that might not make it from a more current era, like a Beer Money or something like that. Once the bell rings, people care. I think as soon as you're done going, let's get ready to suck it, people kind of mentally tune out.
I mean, I'd go Dudley Boyz over New Age Outlaws, for instance.
Oh yeah,
but
we also have to. We kind of have to mention they were also the Voodoo Kin Mafia in TNA as well.
Yes,
which definitely hurt their legacy quite a bit.
And the James Gang, even another movie thing, by the way.
James Gang, what was that?
Because he was BG James, and they brought in Billy Gunn as Kip James, just so they could call them the James Gang. That's
stupid as all hell.
Well, you talk about stupid as all hell. You know why they're called the Voodoo Kin Mafia, right?
Yeah, Vincent Kennedy McMahon.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
and they spent like 6 months trying to call out DX to have a match with them.
Yeah. I mean, look, you're not going to have an argument from me that TNA doesn't hurt a lot of these things.
Yeah.
The only TNA tag team that I had written down on this whole thing before I stopped just being like, I don't need to do a list of a bunch of TNA tag teams was Beer Money. But I mean, like, Motor City Machine Guns, fucking great tag team.
Fantastic.
Not going to be on the Mount Rushmore, but Mount Rushmore of a different type of, qualifiers than, yeah. Like, I'd love it if they signed Alex Shelley and Chris Sabin, even though they're well past the point that they should have signed them before. Like Beer Money Inc., I know that, like, Peter, I know that's going to be one of your tag teams for the Mount Rushmore. To me, Beer Money Inc.'s not on a Mount Rushmore of all time.
I mean, if we're talking about, like, just tag teams that I've lived through, if I was to narrow it down to, like, okay, never mind going back and studying tapes or anything, just tag teams that I've lived through, Beer Money's probably on that list. Beer Money was a fucking great tag team. They're hindered by the fact that they were a great TNA tag team.
Yeah, that kind of, it hinders AMW as well.
And
it's quite funny that James Storm was part of arguably the two best tag teams in TNA's history.
I mean, those TNA had a great run of some good tag teams. They had teams like, the Naturals, even Team Canada, Bobby Roode, Eric Young for a while. good tag team. You know, as you get into it, the best of 5 series with Beer Money and the Motor City Machine Guns, you know, it's that TNA curse.
We didn't talk really about them. I mentioned them in passing, but Harlem Heat.
Fucking
excellent tag team.
Great. One of the best WCW tag teams.
I would say the definitive WCW
like
tag team.
Specifically, like the Turner era WCW, they might be the tag team.
I think that they are tag team. I feel like the Steiner brothers kind of are in that range.
Yeah, they were great. They were a great team as well.
I always loved their finish.
Oh yeah, their finish was amazing. We need to talk about that stuff with certain people. Like the Road Warriors have one of the definitive tag team finishes, and the Steiners have that as well. It's like with the Dudley Boyz, you have the 3D. You have that one iconic move that everyone associates with the team. I think that's an important part that we have to consider as well with a lot of them.
I feel like
Express, as generic as it is now,
like the heart attack.
I feel like that's the type of thing that a lot of people would get caught up on that as being like this check that you have to have, being like, well, you can't be a part of the Mount Rushmore if you don't have an iconic tag team finisher. But I feel like it is one of those things that could push you over the edge. Like Road Warriors, like that was a big deal of their gimmick, and it shouldn't be lost in translation. And I will argue, like, New Age Outlaws, they don't have that. Like, they do not have that. I don't even know what the hell their finisher technically was.
I want to say it was a spike pile driver. Am I wrong on that, Callum?
I wouldn't have been surprised that. I know Billy Gunn used the pile driver quite a lot, so I wouldn't be surprised if that was one of the moves. I thought their finisher was just Road Dogg shimmying while Billy Gunn sits in the corner just sucking wind.
Well, while we're talking spike pile drivers and great wrestlers and great finishers, Brainbusters, Arn and Tully.
I think that they are an absolutely great heel tag team of all time, really, almost. But it's hindered by the fact that they were together for 3 or 4 years. They're not together for as long as many people would probably consider. But they had that WWF run. I think they were champions for 3 months or whatever. They're the ones that ended the Demolition run, so they're significant for that thing. Do you know how their tag team ended?
Because Tully got fired and they didn't bring him back for WCW.
Well, yeah, that was what was going to happen is that they were going to leave WWF anyway as a tag team, and they'd been offered $750,000 on a 3-year contract to go back to WCW. But before they managed to sign on the dotted line and get all those things sorted, Tully gets suspended, like Rob says, from WWF, and so they rescind his offer from WCW, and Arn Anderson gets brought in on a contract that's $150,000 shorter than it would have been,
which actually hurt their friendship.
Yeah, they stopped talking to each other for years and years after that point.
And isn't that dumb? All right, listen, it was 1989 in the wrestling business. Tully Blanchard was not the only wrestler doing cocaine. It's very strange to me that they're just the other company suspended you, so we're just not going to hire you.
He was probably one of the you were the weird one if you weren't doing cocaine probably at that point. So. Right. But yeah, it's just one of those things that how it went out. But I feel like just their lack of longevity probably rules them out. But as a tag team, they were awesome.
Arn and Tully probably did more for the Rockers than any other team. And I think over on the NWA side, when it became Ole left the Horsemen, Arn and Tully became that bedrock of the Horsemen, and just great matches all around. You could put them in the ring with the Road Warriors and they look like $1 million.
Tossing out a random name here, Wild Samoans.
They're fun. They're a fun team. They have that. They're part of the big monster heel genre of tag teams. Not both mixture of the monster heel and the evil foreigner gimmick, because that was kind of they're 2 archetypes of 1980s and back tag team wrestling. And in that role, they fitted in pretty well. I certainly wouldn't put them on the Mount Rushmore, but they were a fun act while they lasted.
Shout out to Alpha, who's still fucking training people.
Obviously, if the Wild Samoans do not get on there, the Head Shrinkers don't, because the Head Shrinkers are just an offshoot of that.
Yeah.
And
Rikishi's great.
Yeah, Rikishi's great. Head Shrinkers for their time, fun tag team. But
hey,
yeah.
Well, no, what we could say about Rikishi is that he could definitely spawn a good tag team.
Yeah, the Usos.
Yeah.
Yes.
Hell of a tag team. They're in that like modern era-ish discussion, I think.
I don't know. They're for me, I don't know, it's odd because their biggest feud has probably been against the New Day, but they're level pegging with the New Day. I think the New Day have a bit more like star power associated with their tag team, but I feel like the Usos are almost more of a well-oiled machine. They're more of like an archetype tag team, whereas the New Day is this is a tag team, but it's this strange like evolution on it almost of a tag team that also works as just being big stars in their own right as well. The Usos are more of like a traditional tag team.
I think we can all agree, even though the Wild Samoans, Head Shrinkers, and the Usos might not get on this list, those Samoans probably have mastered tag team wrestling more than anybody. Like, it's natural for them. What is that?
Family.
I know. I don't want to say like a group of people or anything like that haven't done it, but you may be, some people who know me as like a big New Japan fan might be quite interested in hearing that I haven't mentioned any Japanese teams, and that's because I really don't know any. It's a thing. It's a theme of New Japan in the most recent years is that they really don't give a fuck about tag team wrestling. I don't say they don't give a fuck about tag team wrestling. Most of their shows are headline. Not to say most of their shows, but a lot of their shows are like have tag team matches basically throughout. But in terms of the tag team champions, they don't really care about those titles at all. Probably even less than WWE. I'm just saying so.
You know, so I'm guessing you're not a big fan of Guerrillas of Destiny, and
I wouldn't be a fan of Guerrillas of Destiny even if like that they did care about the tag team titles in New Japan, because I just don't think they're that good. They're
that's
okay.
fair.
Yeah, you're not going to hear an argument from me that the Jumping Bomb Angels should be on this list. Have a Mount Rushmore of all time.
They would. I'd put them over the Guerrillas of Destiny.
Oh, absolutely.
I've never seen Guerrillas of Destiny,
good.
so
No.
For that matter, like yeah, there are women's tag teams and stuff, but like no for the Bella Twins, and
What?
I can't think of a single female tag team that I'd put on the Mount Rushmore. Sorry.
I mean, there were quite a few like decent like tag team acts in the Japanese women's scene. A few that I can kind of like pick off the top of my head. I know I like read through quite a lot of them when we were doing the women's like Mount Rushmore beforehand, but they're not springing out on the top of my head now. But I don't think that they're going to end up being part of this discussion at the very least.
No, they're not. So we are going to talk about Sasha and Bailey being a great tag team.
Like, I legitimately can't think of a single tag team on the women's division that I would even really consider being part of this discussion.
Well, certainly not nowadays, no.
I mean, like Divas of Doom. Okay, they're interesting for a gimmicky type of thing, but they aren't a thing. And Kabuki Warriors, yeah, I'm a big fan of Asuka, big fan of Kairi Sane, but no, they're not on the Mount Rushmore of tag teams. And you know, maybe any of these things can happen in the future, but like, nah, not for now.
You know, there's a few teams that we haven't talked about, so I just want to throw one out there. What about something like, I know Tony will pop for this, but like Owen Hart, Yokozuna, anybody from the New Generation era even worth going into, or just no?
As much as I love like Owen and Yoko, I can't put them on there.
I don't really. None of that era of tag team wrestling in WWE doesn't really stand out to me. As like, they stand out to me as characters, but they don't stand out to me as like being great, legendary tag teams. You probably have to go back a bit further, which is the time that I enjoy doing anyway. So go back a bit further. What do you guys think about Nikolai Volkov and the Iron Sheik?
Not a Mount Rushmore tag team, but a hell of a duo act.
A heat magnet. They were real heat magnets for that sort of kind of like I don't want to say the definitive foreign heel tag team, but in WWE they were pretty much that's what their role was, and they performed it very well.
Yeah, I would agree. Not a great team, but a lot of fun for just the amount of shit that they stirred.
They're actually, I think, again, we don't subscribe like very closely to the Wrestling Observer like match ratings, but I think they've actually got the record for the worst rated tag team match in history, which is that match with the Bushwhackers and at that what was it, Heroes of Wrestling event. I think that's got a -5-star rating. So I do want to watch that match with like on this at one point, because I haven't already watched it and I've suffered through it, and I want these two to suffer through it as well. So
the Foreign Legion.
Oh yeah, that's what they were called.
Yeah.
Because they couldn't use their real names.
The U.S. Express. I'm looking at a bunch of names from back in this time.
They were the people that originally used the Hulk Hogan's theme music.
Right. Soul Patrol, Dream Team, British Bulldogs, Strike Force, Brainbusters, Colossal Connection. No. Nasty Boys. Let's just see. This has nothing really to do with this kind of discussion, but now I'm just curious because I just thought of Nasty Boys. See if you guys can guess. What's the tag team I always think of when somebody says Nasty Boys, other than the Nasty Boys? It's just a random little trivia thing.
Who do you think of when you put the Nasty Boys?
There's another tag team that
Natural
pops in my
Disasters?
mind. Nope.
Public Enemy.
Yup.
Wow.
Why am I doing
That's
that?
really good, man.
Isn't that one of those weird things? It's just, I don't know, my brain for some reason goes, Nasty Boys. Oh yeah, then there was Public Enemy, like WCW's Nasty Boys kind of thing. And it's, I don't know, Public Enemy for some reason. Couldn't even tell you the two names of the guys in Public Enemy. But
Rocco Rock and Johnny Grunge.
Yeah, I couldn't remember that. But Public Enemy stands out to me as just kind of like that they wanted to be the Nasty Boys kind of thing or something. It's just one of those dumb
So
things.
I think that moment was proof that I have been around you way too much. But while we're talking about them, anything about Public Enemy? I think they're a lot of fun.
No.
I
just
don't think there's going to be
fun.
many teams from the ECW ranks that get into it. Obviously, you had like the Impact players and people like that are good tag teams, but nothing really definitive.
Benoit Malenko, a lot of fun. Nothing like, oh, they got to be on the Mount Rushmore.
To mention like Benoit and Malenko, but pivot into that, a team that's not going to make it, but Los Guerreros was like
Fun tag team.
If you're looking at a team like, if you were to talk about the ruthless aggression period of tag teams, that they would definitely be on my list for that.
If we're thinking tag team names, just names alone, you got to put two dudes with attitudes on there. What a dumb name. I hated that so much.
So Shawn and Diesel, like, they're the definitive, like, Shawn needs a belt, Diesel needs a belt. I think if you look at the booking of Diesel, you can kind of understand a little bit about how Vince McMahon thinks. But I love that tag match they have with Razor and the 1-2-3 Kid. It's on the network. I would suggest that you all look at it sometime. A lot of fun. Michaels and Diesel nowhere near the Mount Rushmore.
I always hated the Body Donnas.
Fuck the Body Donnas.
I mean, you just mentioned two of them, so you might as well bring up the Outsiders now.
That's tough. It's sort of like, I'd ultimately say no, but
they are game changers.
They switched a lot of things up, and it's like they're almost a better tag team shoot-wise than they are kayfabe. You know what I mean?
I get what you're saying with that, yeah.
Yeah.
Like, the pairing of Hall and Nash on the business side of things is one hell of a tag team.
Oh no, the greatest feud in WCW history is the Outsiders versus WCW's Checkbook. They'd have put that in a headlock and just squeezed it for everything that was worth.
You know, the Outsiders. I know I talk a lot about Kevin Nash and how I'm a fan, but is that not like the best use of Kevin Nash? He talks shit, let Scott do all the wrestling, and then just like tag in, drop somebody with a powerbomb, and you're done.
Yeah, that was pretty much the best of Kevin's career.
Ultimately, I think Kevin Nash to me, and it might just be my bias of like when I was watching, I think Diesel. Like, I just think of like guy who comes in, big dude, straight to the top. He played the bodyguard type thing. He ends up being the world champion, all that. Like, I kind of feel like if he didn't get injured and if he didn't have just a different philosophy to different things and stuff, but mostly like his injury with his legs and stuff, I feel like Diesel could have been an actual really, really big deal compared to a lot of other things.
I think if Nash stays in WWE when the business actually improves, he could have been a bigger deal, because I think a lot of the shit that he gets for his reign is because the entire thing around him sucked. He was at one of the bright spots, believe it or not, you know? I think that's what I always feel when I think of Kevin Nash.
But in the same token, I don't think the business improves if he stays in WWE.
I agree with that 100%.
Yeah.
So I agree with you. He would have worked out better had he been in a really hot World Wrestling Federation promotion. But he's essentially the catalyst to start that like acceleration of wrestling. It's him and Scott Hall jumping ship is like the catalyst for so many great things that the Attitude Era. Well, so much great like ratings that the Attitude Era promoted.
That's one of the reasons why we're not doing a Wrestling is 2020 about should we keep those guys in WWF at the time, is because we pretty much all are just like, nah, NWO means more and like that kind of thing.
Oh yeah, well, if they'd have stayed, then if they'd have stayed, then like we wouldn't have had the boom that we had for that period. Oh god, I'm just looking through my list. There's still so many teams we haven't discussed.
I mean, yeah, because tag team wrestling is just this. It's a lot of fun. We haven't even touched on like the Fabulous Freebirds and the Von Erichs.
Yeah, which is like
literally kept the territory alive and thriving.
Yeah, I'm gonna say no.
Of course you will, because you don't know anything about it.
Yeah,
but, if we talk Michael Hayes, he's done a lot for you, I'm sure. As Doc Hendricks.
Look, as good as knives and forks and spoons are on top of the coats and stuff, like the Freebirds and the Von Erichs to me is another one of those blind spots where I'm like, I hear about this constantly. I have literally no appreciation for it, and it's just, you know,
essentially from the late 70s to the like mid 80s. These two teams were WCCW, World Class Championship Wrestling. They essentially were the feud that propelled that promotion forward. Like the Von Erichs were obviously the son of Fritz Von Erichs, who was the promoter of the promotion, so they got pushed really heavily. They were the big stars. The huge baby faces. The Fabulous Freebirds were the great heels that broke all the rules and like pushed boundaries and did things the wrong way, but in the right way. It's like they do the wrong things in the right way. But it's I mean, out of the two of them, I feel like I'd go with the Freebirds over the Von Erichs, because even though I feel like the Von Erichs were bigger stars in their short cacophony of time that they were working, the Fabulous Freebirds have a much more longevity. They worked in more promotions than the Von Erichs did.
And when's the distinction come in between stable and tag team too?
Well, I feel like part of the reason why the Freebirds should be on the Mount Rushmore above all else is because they instituted the Freebird rule.
Yeah, they literally gave it the Freebird rule. They're a 3-man tag team.
Yeah, without them, there is no New Day.
Yeah. No, I mean, like, as far as, like, if somebody is out there going, oh, trios don't count, then you got to take the Freebirds out. You got to take the New Day out. You got to, you know, like, that kind of thing. Like, it's it's semantics for some things like that. Like,
but to that person,
those people that say taking them out. Yeah.
You know, if you're gonna discount that trio, then the New Day belongs nowhere near the tag team Mount Rushmore. So, like, You can't have it both ways.
But we're deciding based on our terms, and I feel like both those groups fit
Absolutely.
into our categorization of tag teams.
Freebirds is a tag team to me. Yeah.
Yeah. And I'd say the Von Erichs are a tag team as well. If you take the Von Erichs in terms of their team as David, Kevin, and Kerry as like the three main members of the group, I kind of like talking about. I don't enjoy talking about the Von Erichs, but the Von Erichs are just the most tragic family in wrestling history. It's such a bizarre and horrible story. Like, if anyone has not seen like any documentaries regarding the Von Erichs or anything like that, I would like urge anybody to just try and read up or watch some stuff about these guys. Not so much like you wouldn't have to watch their matches, but just their backstory. I mean, like 6-7 brothers, 5 of them commit suicide, or 5 of them die ridiculously young. So David, who died of like a drug overdose. Kerry obviously shot himself.
Chris shoots himself.
Yeah, Mike kills himself with tranquilizers.
Mike kills himself. Before they even get into wrestling, Jack Jr. gets electrocuted. Like, it's so fucking out there, man.
Yeah, the only one that's still remaining is Kevin. So
good for Kevin.
Yeah, I don't know how that guy is able to keep going when essentially his entire family just died in a short space of time. But like, he's made of a lot tougher stuff than most people.
And for that matter, his children, Ross and Marshall, are now tag team. They're tag team champions in the MLW. You know, carrying on that legacy. And like, they're good wrestlers, and they're a good team, depending on the two that you get. But I think ultimately, like, Freebirds Von Erich might be on a Mount Rushmore of best tag team feuds, but I don't think they're on the Mount Rushmore of tag teams.
What's Lacey Von Erich been up to? She's still doing anything?
Not that I'm aware of.
I have not thought about Lacey Von Erich at all.
Yeah, that's it. When we were talking about Von Erichs right now, you were talking about kids and stuff. It's just like, oh, Lacey Von Erich was the thing for a little bit.
I feel like you've sullied this entire conversation. Like, this entire podcast is ruined.
Well, you know what?
You brought up Lacey Von Erich.
You know what's kind of interesting is I'd almost argue, if we were talking Mount Rushmore of TNA tag teams, I'd almost argue Beautiful People would be on that list.
Like, yeah,
isn't that kind of strange?
I would. That's fair.
No, but I feel like they were one of the most long-running tag teams in TNA's history.
But it would be
it
would be Angelina Love and Velvet Sky. Wouldn't be Lacey Von Erich.
I'd add Madison Rayne to it though.
Yeah.
I feel like she was a big enough deal. But is it now time that I can bring up the Fabulous Kangaroos?
Oh, please.
Yeah. What the hell's the Fabulous Kangaroos?
Oh yeah, so I've been talking about Tony about this behind the scenes, and he obviously had no idea who it was, but that's pretty fair because there's a tag team that. So they wrestled from like the 1950s until the like early 1980s with like a mixture of tag teams. The main tag team was Al Costello and was Roy Heffernan. So both of them one of them was an Italian that had moved to Australia in his early years, and the other one, Roy Heffernan, was an like born and bred Australian. They started working together in Australia, but then eventually became one of the most, I don't want to say like the first tag team that was very internationally renowned, but they were definitely one of the like foremost tag teams that started to just get around all the different promotions. They worked in WWF, they worked in like NWA promotions, they worked all over the place. They eventually Heffernan left, and so he switched with other partners. So he brought in like Ray St. Clair and Don Kent, and then you just continue. It just continue with like certain tag teams all the way up until like the early 80s. And obviously, most people won't know who they are, but they're an archetype essentially. Well, not an archetype, but they're a forefather of tag team wrestling, which in many people's eyes would earn them a spot on the Mount Rushmore, but obviously, we're going with more like significance. I feel there are more significant teams than Kangaroos, but I like I like showing off how much I've dug into the history of tag team wrestling. So I want to bring up. The interesting thing was that they formed a new Fabulous Kangaroos in that ran. Yeah, that was their name, the new Fabulous Kangaroos. And that was from 93, 94, and and one of the members of that team was Al Snow.
Wow.
Shut the fuck up.
Yeah, 93 to 94. So Al Snow was this also brought even more amazing thing for me is that it was 93, 94. Al Snow had already been wrestling for 11 years when that tag team had formed.
God,
Al Snow debuted in 1982.
damn,
That's like bizarre to me. It's just like I see him wrestling in the early 2000s. Okay, he's probably been wrestling like 10 years. So he's wrestling like 20 years when he got like 15, 20 years when he got his most over. It's just bizarre to me. But
How old's
that
Al
was just
Snow
my little
now?
thing. Must be in his like late 50s, I'd imagine.
He looks great for his age.
Oh,
I mean,
jeez.
you know what? Just because he looks so good and he's been wrestling so long, Al Snow ahead. Tag team Mount Rushmore.
Well, what does
I
everybody
think
want?
they'd be on the
For them to
ECW one.
in
They'd
there?
be on the ECW one, yeah.
You know, there's so many good tag teams. I want to bring up a more modern one. Where do we stand on a team like Fish and O'Reilly, who have won the belts in New Japan, have won the belts in Ring of Honor, and are now killing it in NXT?
I feel like if we were to do a Mount Rushmore of like the past 10 years, they'd be in the discussion for sure.
Oh yeah, they'd absolutely beat that. I mean, they're an absolutely phenomenal tag team. Like produced excellent match. I mean, if you're looking at like the last 10 years, you bring up the NXT crew of like American Alpha and the Revival and DIY. I'd say you bring up the Briscoes as well from Ring of Honor as well. They've been a very long running tag team as well. And the Young Bucks, obviously. I wouldn't put the Young Bucks in yet, but I feel like maybe, depending on how this AEW thing ends up turning out, maybe 10, 15 years' time, we could be talking a bit more about the Young Bucks.
You know what, though? I would make this argument for the Young Bucks. They are were one of, for a long time, the only talked about tag teams in wrestling. Like, they have been consistently making sure tag team wrestling matters.
Stays alive.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, they're the people that made it possible to make a really good. I don't know if they made it possible, but they demonstrated that it's possible to make a really good living on the independent circuit if you work hard enough.
All right, I want to bring up a team that is not going to get on the Mount Rushmore, and I think that's because of when you stay territorial sometimes, it hinders you. But the Briscoes, consistent in Ring of Honor and consistent, great matches, a lot of fun, good character work. But if you don't know Ring of Honor, you don't know the Briscoes.
See, it's funny because you said the Briscoes immediately, and then my mind immediately went to Jack and Jerry. Yeah, Jack and Jerry Briscoe.
Sorry, Mark and Jay. I should have been clear. But yeah, that's kind of my take on them. Like, I think that they're great and definitely one of the bigger tag teams of the last decade for sure. But they didn't leave Ring of Honor.
Yeah, I mean, Ring of Honor tag teams, they probably
they are the Mount Rushmore.
They are the Mount Rushmore of that promotion. But yeah, grand scheme of things, I don't think they go too much further than that.
You brought up the other Briscoes.
Yeah,
they're influential. They're another team that I have a blind spot to.
Well, it's funny because they essentially, when they actually start, they're real life brothers, so they were together for a while, but they never really became a tag team until after they'd had significant success as singles wrestlers. So Jack is a former NWA world champion. Jerry Briscoe won the light heavyweight versions of that title for a few times, and they teamed together during those runs. But they wrestled all the time as baby faces. But then they decided in the 1980s, okay, we're going to come together now and be the ultimate heel tag team. And even though they'd been wrestling as baby faces for their entire career, they came together and managed to produce just this excellent old school heel tag team unit. With I think that their main trait was that Jack was obviously the older brother and the more statesman of the two when they were conducting promos, and Jerry would essentially just run behind him during his interviews and just wave at the camera and just like some sort of just a childish brother essentially. So they're fun, but I don't think that they would get on this list. In the same vein that I would say that the Funks wouldn't make it on this list either.
I knew you'd tie those together. Actually,
Well,
had them
because
next to
their
each
main
other.
feud was against the Funks,
Yeah,
yes.
because that's why I was going to bring them up if you didn't. Same kind of thing for me. Blind spot. I'm sure people with an appreciation for older eras would be like, this great match and this thing. But I don't know.
While we're talking Briscoes and Funks, I want to talk about the Charlotte territory overall and how it was revitalized by being a tag team territory, and that's how Ric Flair got his start with Rip Hawk and Johnny Valentine. Ric Flair was a tag team guy. The precursor to Starrcade was a tag team steel cage match between Sergeant Slaughter and Don Kernoodle against Ricky Steamboat and Jay Youngblood, and that literally shut down traffic. That's how big tag team wrestling was in that territory. And I don't think you can talk about that without talking Andersons, Arn and Ole, or even Ole and Gene. The Andersons for a while were tag team wrestling.
I would almost say, if it was individuals, it'd sound weird, but I would put Ole Anderson almost as a tag team thing. Not both as for his influence in being obviously a great tag team wrestler in his own right, but also just being a great booker of tag teams as well. I mean, the Road Warriors is the brainchild of Ole Anderson.
Yep.
So, without him, there's no Road Warriors. And so, I feel like if you're going individuals, I'd definitely be a big proponent of putting Ole on it. I don't think as a tag team themselves, I would put Ole and Arn or Ole and Gene onto this one. But still great, obviously. I want to talk about just because we're going down the little rabbit hole of territory tag teams. Well, the Blonde Bombers, Pat Patterson and Ray Stevens.
I always hear a lot about this team.
A lot of old school wrestlers talk about them as if they were the greatest tag team that ever lived, essentially. And it doesn't surprise me because I've never seen them wrestle. So, and I kind of want, after I've heard seen some people talk about and describe them, I kind of want to check them out because there's no doubt that Pat Patterson is one of the greatest minds in professional wrestling history. I feel like, and he extended that over to the booking side of WWF with the Royal Rumble's his brainchild, all this other great stuff. So it wouldn't surprise me that he absolutely would be able to nail tag team psychology like nobody else. But then again, if you look at the most decorated tag teams of all time, they only had one reign as AWA tag team champions. I think they had a few of the minor NWA tag team titles as well, but they don't really have that much. If you were to just check through a history book of tag team champions and stuff like that, they wouldn't appear that often. So they're a team that were great but could get lost to history pretty easily.
I would say not a lot of people talk about it now, but Dusty Rhodes and Dick Murdoch, the Texas Outlaws, that started Dusty's career. So, obviously big there. Nobody's really thinking about that nowadays when you think of Dusty Rhodes, but it's still, very important that doesn't get lost to time.
Same with Dick the Bruiser and Crusher Calhoun.
Yeah, the Road Warriors just ran right through those guys. Poor dudes. We can go literally all day, and we haven't even scratched the surface.
I feel like we've covered a lot of the big names now. I think we're probably getting ready to start cutting the wheat from the chaff, essentially.
Are there names that you feel are in that all-time discussion that we haven't brought up yet? I think we all are in agreement. Rock and Roll Express and Road Warriors are more than likely getting on this list.
Absolutely, yeah.
And then, are there any that are other ones that are because right now I've got a list of some different ones that we were talking about for different types of things, but I don't have anybody else in that range from what I've kind of the conjecture of this conversation.
Well, I feel like we've gone through a lot of them. It's time to just kind of start bringing home some of the ones that we've kind of been leaning towards, ones that are in that conversation. I would say that the ones that we kind of have up that are pushing towards that are, I'd say, Demolition are one of the teams in that range. I'm not saying these are going to be the ones that are definitively in it. I'd say there's an argument for the New Day, the Dudley Boyz, the Fabulous Freebirds, maybe the Midnight Express, but maybe not. You're looking at potentially, I'd say Harlem Heat is potentially in this discussion.
I would argue. I still think an argument can be made for the Bucks.
There's a small argument I feel for the Bucks as well. I'd say Red Dragon also has a slight argument as well. I'm calling them Red Dragon rather than Undisputed Era, just to distinguish them a little bit more. I feel like the Von Erichs could potentially be in it.
I feel like I'd be more
look at the Hardys as well.
I'd be more comfortable with a list of something like Rock and Roll Express, Road Warriors, Fabulous Freebirds, and Dudley Boyz, and New Day, like those kind of names, that I would like the Young Bucks, even, or Red Dragon, or like I could see the Dudley Boyz being on this list. I think that's a good one to potentially put in the maybe pile.
I mean, if you're asking my opinion in terms of who I feel like in my mind there are 6 standout, maybe 7 standout candidates, which are Road Warriors and Rock and Roll Express, as we discussed. I'd say on top of that you're adding the Fabulous Freebirds, the Dudley Boyz, the Von Erichs. Who was that? It was mind going blank now. Just trying to think of those ones. Harlem Heat and one of either the New Day or the Midnight Express. Maybe both of those ones. So maybe 8 of those ones.
Yeah.
Yeah. Maybe in my mind, those 8 teams kind of. I don't say that stand up above the rest because there's a lot of great tag teams out there, but they're the ones that kind of screaming out in my mind as potentials.
Last chance to make a pitch for the New Age Outlaws, Tony.
I mean, I probably wouldn't put them on there. I think that for the same reasons, I wouldn't put Harlem Heat on there. And I wouldn't put... Well, let me be a little transparent. So, I've got a list of about 20-something names that we had talked about from different ranges. And these are the names that I read. So I kind of feel like maybe these are the names that we're working with a little bit. Rock and Roll Express, Road Warrior. This is in no particular order, by the way, too. Rock and Roll Express, Road Warriors, Dudley Boyz, Fabulous Freebirds, Von Erichs, New Day, New Age Outlaws, Hart Foundation, British Bulldogs, Demolition, Steiner Brothers, Harlem Heat, Wild Samoans, Young Bucks, Hardy Boyz, Edge and Christian, Usos, Red Dragon. Out at Midnight Express. I kind of feel like that's our range. Full scope. Am I missing any?
No, I feel like
that sounds about right.
I feel like the 4 teams are going to come from that group.
Yeah. So out of that group, and I'll make this a little bit easier for everybody, and I'll send them on Facebook Messenger while we're doing this.
I mean, I know it. I mean, you're doing that. I've like after listing those things, I've got my 4 that I would go with.
I kind of feel like the 4 that make the most sense to me, depending on your philosophies of everything like that, because we don't have to do this either. Cause there's an argument to be made where you can say, like, why don't you pick some classics and you can pick like a different era at different things and kind of be like, all right, from the 90s, 2000s range, I would go with the Dudley Boyz. And then on like the more modern side of things, I'd go either it has to be the New Day or the Young Bucks. Like the Dudley Boyz would beat out Harlem Heat for me, for instance. And they'd beat out the New Age Outlaws, and they'd beat out Edge and Christian, and they'd beat out the Hardy Boyz. And the New Day would beat out the Usos. And the Young Bucks would put up a fight against the New Day. And they'd also beat out Red Dragon. And if we're going back in the older school types of things where it's like Steiner Brothers and Hart Foundation, British Bulldogs and Demolition, I'd be like, okay, well, that's Road Warriors. And like you can make, but we don't have to go by the error type thing either. So I'm kind of feeling like maybe my list would be Rock and Roll Express, Road Warriors, Dudley Boyz, and the Freebirds.
That was the 4 that I was specifically thinking of.
That was my 4 as well.
Oh shit! Then we're done.
Yeah, like
that was a lot easier for that discussion.
I just feel like with the Road Warriors, you've got like just this ultimate badass like powerhouse tag team. You've got the Rock and Roll Express, so the longevity of the Rock and Roll Express, the high flying aspect of their characters, the ultimate babyface side of things, whereas the Road Warriors with the big monster heels. Fabulous Freebirds, you have more of the cocky, charismatic heels, and oftentimes babyfaces as well. Worked multiple territories, got over in multiple places, instituted a rule which has been a dominant, prevailing thing in tag team wrestling beyond them. And the Dudley Boyz, I feel, really constitute everything from the 90s onwards, really, as like I think they're the definitive tag team of the Attitude Era onwards.
Yeah, I sort of feel like you cover a lot of bases of what tag team wrestling is. Like you said, like Freebirds, they institute an entire rule. That's why you have the New Day. That's why you have, like you can bring 3 people in for demolition, even because of the Freebirds. And you can bring in people from stables and have them be like the Undisputed Era. Technically speaking, Adam Cole is a part of that tag team. But it's like, well, the Red Dragon group is the tag team inside of that. But because of the Freebird rule, a stable is now a whole thing. And it's like that Freebirds kind of represent stable wrestling to me. Rock and Roll Express is like that, the 2 young dudes who are appealing to the girls and kind of jumping around and doing their shtick. So it's like that's where the Young Bucks come from. And the Rockers come from that.
And the Hardys, yeah.
The Hardy Boyz definitely come from that. The Road Warriors are like we get these 2 big, burly, powerful dudes. So any tag team that's kind of like the group is like these 2 big dudes beating the shit out of people. Even like AOP is from Road Warriors. I mean, they had
the point where they had Paul Ellering.
Yeah, they had Paul Ellering. Like, and they gave them outfits that were like, they're not giving them shoulder pads with spikes on them, but they had the riot gear type stuff. And it's like, because that's Road Warrior shtick. And
I think
it's kind of like they all sort of fit in that range. The Dudley Boyz are sort of like that attitude. So the New Age Outlaws and all that,
I feel like the Dudley Boyz represent, in a similar way to the New Age Outlaws, they represent a team which seemingly has no right to be a tag team. Obviously, as I would say, you wouldn't naturally put Devon and Bubba Ray together if they weren't the Dudley Boyz. Obviously they're pretty much inseparable in our minds, but when they first started, you wouldn't exactly say, "Wow, that looks like a tag team." It's like the idea of like just throwing 2 random guys together.
Yeah,
and it just created magic.
Even though there's instances of tag teams that pretended to be brothers and stuff before them, like the Dudley Boyz gives you the range to do something like the Holly cousins, because they weren't related. But it's like, well, that's their gimmick, let's just make them blonde and short hair and do this. And now they're the Hollies instead of the Dudleys.
Well, I think that's just a wrestling trope. But I think where the Dudleys come in, like the other 3 are evergreen and they're on this list because of their impact. And then the Dudleys almost tie all of it together. They're 2 pretty big dudes who, get that from the Road Warriors where they can just beat the shit out of you. They take some of the high energy of the Rock and Roll Express and the importance of double team moves, like, the 3D and the backwards 3D. And then when you look at the Freebirds, the Dudleys started as just this weird clan of dudes, and they were all the team because you can mix and match.
Yeah, I feel really comfortable with them as the 4.
Yeah, Now, if we were to kind of do a little subset here and say, let's say the modern era is the past 20 years, 2000 to 2020.
Okay. If we're going 2000 to 2020, Dudley Boyz are obviously on there. I would put...
That's where I'd put the New Day as potential, for sure.
I put the New Day, and I think I would put the Young Bucks in there as well.
I think that, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I feel like the Usos are in the discussion.
Yeah, the Usos are in discussion. Red Dragon's in discussion. I'd say the Hardys are definitely in the discussion for that. You're looking at Beer Money as well as potential. I feel like it would be remiss not to put the Hardys in that foursome as well.
I would say Dudley's obviously. I put Beer Money personally. I think you'd have to put the Hardys, and then for me it'd be the Bucks.
See, I would go Dudley's, Hardys, New Day, and either the Bucks or the Usos. Usos, me.
Yeah, I just like I said, it's that TNA curse. I just really wish like Beer Money was a bigger deal.
I don't feel super comfortable about kicking Red. Well, there's two teams. I don't feel comfortable kicking Red Dragon immediately to the curb, and I don't feel because the Revival are an awesome tag. No, I don't think we've discussed nearly as much as maybe they deserve on this, but they're too fresh, maybe.
Yeah,
saying that maybe you look back in 10 years' time when they've had a successful run as AEW Tag Team Champions, that you decide maybe they should be on it instead.
When they become the cornerstone of the AEW Tag Team division, then we'll be able to talk about
Revival's got potential for sure. Yeah. At the very least, potential to bump off something like the Red Dragon group or something like. I
think American Alpha too short-lived. You know.
Yeah.
We didn't get a chance to talk about this team, and probably largely because Tony doesn't watch Ring of Honor and wasn't watching at this time anyway. But Kings of Wrestling, Hero and or Cesaro and Cassius Ohno.
Oh yeah, they look great. Team. Yeah,
very
great
mysterious ice cream.
The American Wolves, even.
Yeah, again, we just could bring up like tons of
tag team wrestling is really good, is what we're saying.
Hey, if we hadn't brought we overlooked teams like the Heidenreich and Animal version of LOD. It's like it's like a lot of great teams are being lost here.
The Draws and Animal version of LOD.
But I guess they're all on there because LOD is on there. They're on there in spirit.
It'll be interesting when we eventually do, because we will eventually down the line do Mount Rushmore of factions. And that'll be different, because then we'll have to take out, like, the Usos is not a faction. And the Young Bucks is not a faction. The New Day is a faction. And the Legion of Doom, you've got a bunch of different people that have been a part of that group, but, like, the Road Warrior Hawk and Road Warrior Animal is the Road Warriors, and you take Road Warrior Animal and Road Warrior Heidenreich and go, well, they were in the Legion of Doom. That's not getting in there for the faction of all time type of thing. So we do still have potentials. If anybody wants us to do more tag team based Mount Rushmores, even though this is the Mount Rushmore of tag teams in pro wrestling, we still could have like a 2-hour long discussion.
WCW tag teams.
Exactly. We could do a Mount Rushmore of WCW tag teams and limit it just to that, and Mount Rushmore of WWE tag teams, and a Mount Rushmore of NXT tag teams. Could even be an hour-long discussion of 15, 20 different tag teams. You know what I mean? So we got plenty of tag team stuff that we can tap into. Factions and stables and trios. If we limited it just to trios and said, well, the faction can't have more than 3 people, probably still have 20 different names on this list or something. You know what I mean? Like that's crazy. And it's almost weirder that we had more options to not be able to go through all these things with the tag teams than we did when we were doing like Mount Rushmore of women's wrestlers or Mount Rushmore of wrestlers. I guess just
Yeah,
because
I
it's
mean,
like you have to sort of cut it off at some point. But
I feel like as the collective, at least speaking personally, I'm a massive proponent of tag team wrestling. I've said countless times, I feel like a great tag team wrestling match is better than a great singles match. There's just so many different variables you can put onto it to just make it more interesting. So if I have an opportunity to just talk about like loads of different tag teams, then I'm going to take as much time as I possibly can to do so.
Yeah, I would very much be in favor of doing more tag team content. I think we're all in agreement. Tag team wrestling is far underutilized and way better than it's given credit for.
oh, also Team Hell No. I forgot to bring them up, but they're not on the list anyway.
They're a good time though. You know what?
Hell of a tag team.
That's a good tag team for like this shouldn't be a thing. I'm so annoyed by this, and they make it work.
Yeah.
Mm.
So our picks then for the Mount Rushmore of tag teams in pro wrestling history for, you know, all different regions and factions and territories and companies and all that. The four are the Rock and Roll Express, the Fabulous Freebirds, the Road Warriors, and the Dudley Boyz. The hell of a foursome.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
Whether you agree or disagree, tell us in the comment section below and toss out some other names that we might have not necessarily given attention to that you feel we should have had in the discussion. Howard, I'd be very interested to see what your opinions are. I know you're more of an older school type of guy. So, you know, where's the Killer Bees come in on your range and stuff like that. But yeah, that's Mount Rushmore number 7. I mentioned before that this was sponsored by Patreon, so thank you, Guest 5, for sponsoring this. And if anybody else is part of this whole mix and they want to help out on the monetary side of things, especially with the demonetization of the channel for over a month and the unknowns when it comes to WrestleMania and all that other kind of stuff, then every buck goes a long way. Those young bucks are good on this list, and the bucks are great for this too. So thank you to anybody who does do that. Thank you in advance. And if you want to check out the TeePublic and Redbubble shops, that's for the merchandise side of things. Smark Moment, Fanboys Anonymous, and A Mango Tees. Try to think of a coronavirus t-shirt to put up. I don't know. If you have any suggestions, tell me. I might end up making some kind of money out of that. I don't know. And I think that the next thing that we've got is a blank week, if I remember correctly, as far as like upcoming content.
We could have a lot of those coming up.
That's going to be up in the air. This is WrestleMania season, and we did have planned that we would do another Hall of Lame and go back and tell you what the results were from the previous Hall of Lame. I did plan on doing a Wrestling with the Past based off of the Hall of Fame, but if we don't have a Hall of Fame, then I don't know how that works out. We are supposed to be doing predictions and review stuff eventually for NXT TakeOver Tampa and for WrestleMania.
These events are still going to happen. They're just...
Who knows if they're happening...
going to happen at the Performance Center.
They might happen at Raymond James Stadium. They might happen at that stadium with no people in it. They might end up happening at the Performance Center. They might end up moving to another stadium or some kind of an arena. Like, I mean, I know that it's already been debunked, but there was like a rumor going around that it was like, hey, they moved to Madison Square Garden, which to me makes no sense, because why would it be like, we're going to get rid of these gatherings, then do this big gathering in New York? Like, it's just that.
Yeah, Madison Square Garden, Governor Cuomo, for anybody who needs to know, things could be shut down for months.
So it's all up in the air, but I'm hoping, at the very least, that WrestleMania goes on for the content side of things, not for the whole coronavirus type thing. I don't know. We might end up having a week where we have so little time to prepare for something just because everything's a little crazy that we end up just kind of pulling something out of our ass. And instead of having like Wrestling with the Past for the Hall of Fame the way that we want to, maybe we end up picking that week to do Superstar Scores and going back and looking at the other things. Maybe there's a week coming up where it's such a dead zone that we end up having 5 podcasts because I'm like, oh, I'm not writing up any articles. Let me just do a bunch of podcasts or something like that. I don't know.
And keep in mind, you will likely have an emergency or hey, look, they moved WrestleMania to the Performance Center. Let's just have a dark cast about it or something. That's likely.
Dark cast material, I haven't been able to think of exactly what I want to do yet, but we might do dark cast type things like that. We might have a spontaneous podcast about something. We might have stuff where we wait until the hot tags to address it. Like right now, I've got some stuff on the hot tags that basically just says like coronavirus kills everything, and like that's just gonna be a whole discussion on that. But like, I don't know. It's we're in completely unknown territory here, so all the trickle down and spill over is just completely unknown. But I do know one thing that's not going to go away is the Smark Madness tournament, because there's nothing that gets affected with that. So go ahead and vote on the Smark Madness tournament. Right now we
are now the official March Madness tournament.
Yeah, we might be one of the only ones that doesn't go down. We're in round 2. It's the best WWE superstars of the past decade. So vote while you can. I'll keep that up until next Tuesday or so, and that'll continue on as it goes. Because if it ends up being the WrestleMania is canceled, then hey, the first week of the April ends up being, let's talk about this Mark Madness tournament that went down. Like, I don't know. Other dark cast material might be happening like just at random, and the only way you get access to that is through the Patreon. And I kind of wanted to maybe bring back some other things that we've done in the past that when I went through my segments list the other day, for anybody who wants to know, I was just like, we haven't done heel or face or belt or bury or any of those kind of things. We haven't done split crowd. And I kind of want to do a split crowd a little bit. I kind of want to get like the 3 of us where 2 of us have some kind of a completely differing opinion and the other one's in the middle, and it has to play mediator of, I don't know, maybe something like debating who's better, Kevin Nash and Diesel, or Kevin Nash and Sid, or something like that. I don't have a clue. But if you have any suggestions of what you'd like to see, drop them in the comments all the time. Doesn't matter what type of week we're on. Even if we're in the middle of the busiest weeks in the whole planning, and we've got guarantees of pay-per-views coming up and all that stuff, if somebody tosses out the idea of, hey, why don't you guys do a fan announce table of this one match that happened in this one pay-per-view, usually I've got a list written down of things that people have suggested. So anytime that you guys go, play the game, that's one of the reasons why we did play the game this week and everything. So just toss out your ideas. Maybe we'll come around to doing them. Maybe sooner than later. I don't know. My plugs are mostly out of the way, though. These guys have other plugs to talk about. Rob?
Yeah, if you want to follow the dumpster fire that is everything getting canceled because of the coronavirus in the world of wrestling, I strongly suggest you check out WrestleZone.com and Fightful.com. Fightful even covers the boxing and MMA side of things, so if you're into that, you can just see everything get canceled. Outside of that, you can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at DudeFelice, and we're just going to keep monitoring the situation. Callum?
So you can follow me on Twitter at Wigmeister14, and you can check out the power rankings as well as all the other articles on smarkandmoment.com. And I'll continue to do the power rankings for as long as they continue to put wrestling on TV for WWE. We'll see how long that ends up lasting, but yeah, keep checking that out and all the other great articles as well as the podcasts. Every opportunity.
And if you want to find out anything else that happens, it's all going to be up on Smark Out Moment on the Facebook, the Twitter, the YouTube, that stuff. If you start following around, you'll find information somehow. And I might post stuff on the Mega Maniacs if things get changed, to join the Facebook group, facebook.com/groups/the Mega Maniacs. If you want more Fanboys Anonymous content, I don't know when the hell the next movie is that I'm going to go see, because nothing's coming out. And it's a slow time anyway, but like Black Widow might get moved. I didn't get a chance to see Onward. I didn't get a chance to see Bloodshot. I didn't get a chance to see this and that and that and that. But maybe, we just kind of are running so low that we just, Rob and I, in the middle of the night, some random night, we're just kind of like, hey, let's talk for 50 minutes about Green Arrow or something. I don't know. check out fanboysanonymous.com. Check out what I've got under a mango tree all over the different spectrums. Check out Tony Mango on social media and e-wrestling news and Bleacher Report, and I don't know. We'll see. So thanks for listening to this, everybody. Thanks for your continued support, and thank you in the future for any contributions that you give to us, whether it's a like, a share, a follow, a favorite, a donation, a thumbs up, any of that kind of stuff. But for now, this has been another Smark Out moment, and we're being counted out.